Hey folks, welcome back to another video here on War Room 2nd Edition. This is going to be the final video that I do in my rules review, or rules overview, however you want to look at it. Um, this video is going to cover phases 5, 6, and 7. These are the last phases in the round, and then another round starts, and you go through the same 7 phases. Um, so, we just finished the combat phase. We know this because all of our hotspot tokens have been flipped over to their embattled sides, um, and there are no more battles to resolve. So now we move on to phase 5, which is the refit and deploy phase. And there's a couple different steps in this phase. The first step is any air units or air commands that either A, moved, or B, were in battle may now move up to their using their movement rules, which are two territories away, up to 2 territories away. Um, so, for instance, if we look over here, we did the Battle of Britain in the previous video, and the Germans still have 2 different air commands left over. They have the arrow tags on them to indicate that they will move now during phase 5. So we will remove those tags, and we will move them. So we're basically just going to move them back into, we'll go one out here into A6 and then another one into Greater Germany here. And then these guys will go into A6 and up here into Norway. They have to land in a friendly territory, so we couldn't keep them here. If we kept them here, they would be lost, and they would go to the casualty board, the morale board. Now, the air units for Great Britain and for the United States also participated in that battle. Therefore, they had the air tags placed on them as well. They may move at this point, but they are not going to move. They're just going to stay right where they are, just to help defend Great Britain in case of future bombing runs, which would most likely be coming. So that's basically step 1. You can also at this time split or merge commands. So, for instance, those 2 air units, they could have flown back to the same area, and then I could have merged those into one air unit itself. Or I could split, the 48th, I could split it into 2 different stacks. Use one of my commands that I have in my box if I have available commands. If I don't have available commands, I cannot do any splitting. I can merge in one area to free up a command token and then reuse that command token in another area. That's not an issue. But if I do not have any spare command tokens, I will not be able to do a split. You do have to respect the 8 unit limit, so only 8 units can be stacked, can be in one stack. So you still do have to respect that. Air commands, like I said, do have to go back to a friendly territory to land. They cannot claim a territory all by themselves, so even if they wiped out units in an area that is owned by the opposing side, they cannot gain control of that. You would have to move troops into that territory to be able to gain control of it. So they would have to fly back to a friendly territory to land, whether that is their own territory or an allied territory, an ally of theirs territory. So they could have flown back to, if Italy owned France for whatever reason, or controlled France, they would be able to fly into France and land there. If there's no legal moves for those air units, they will be destroyed, and they will be counted on the casualty board. So you definitely do not want that to happen. And then lastly, for that first step, any carrier aircraft that were deployed will be pulled from the board, and they will be redeployed at the start of the next round. So those just come off the board. They don't count as losses for in this section. If they were destroyed, they would count as a loss for sure. But for as a casualty rather. But for this purpose, once you get to this phase, if they're still out on the board, they just come back it's assumed they make it back and they land. No biggie deal. Next step is to deploy units. If you had any units out that you were currently producing, for instance, at the previous round you had started to produce units, this is where you would deploy them. They would be finished at this point, and you would remove the industry token that would be sitting on top of them, and those units would then either get merged into an existing command if there is one in that area, and if there is not, you would have to use one of your spare commands to start a new command with that unit. You do have to still respect the 8 command limit, or the 8 unit limit in commands. So if you're ever in a situation where you can't respect that limit, let's say you don't have any spare commands, and you have the 2 ground commands you have in there already have 7 units, and you're producing 3 units, three ground units. So you can add 1 unit to each of those command stacks that are currently there, because they can each hold 1 more. But then you have a third one left over. That third one will just stay there under the production, the industry token. You just will not be able to deploy it. You have to wait until you get another command stack in there, or one gets destroyed and you can create a new command, something of that nature. They are obviously going to be deployed wherever they're being built. Same thing with naval units. They have to be deployed wherever they're being built in a sea region, in a port-connected sea area. So wherever the ports are, that's the area they will have to be deployed in. Even if there are enemy units there, you may initiate a battle by producing naval units in deploying them in that sea space. You're not going to initiate a battle with land units, because basically if your enemy takes over your territory where you're producing units, they basically gain control of those units. So those units no longer are yours. If you're producing, let's say you were producing units, let's say here in R4, right? R4 has a strategic value of 3, which means it can produce 3 units at a time. So let's say previous round you started producing 3 units. You have 3 land units getting produced there, and it gets strategically bombed, and there's a bomb token here. That reduces the production by 1 for each bomb token. So if there's 1 token here, now it can only produce 2. So you'll deploy those 2 units that you're able to, but the third unit is actually lost. That third unit will go to your casualty board on the morale board, and it's going to be a detriment to you. But that's the only time that would happen. Like I said, if you don't have enough command tokens to create a new command, or the command stacks you have in the area you're deploying into don't have enough room for them, those units will just remain in production until a future round when you can actually deploy them, or they get destroyed. So that's the second step of the refit and deploy phase, is basically you're deploying your units out, and then you can reorganize your commands. You can do your merges and splits after you've done that as well. We've pretty much talked about doing the merges and splits for commands. So you can do that, any of that at a time right now. And yeah, that pretty much covers phase 5, the refit and deploy. Should be a fairly quick phase. It can be done simultaneously. However, they say if anybody complains, then you should do it in turn order. Especially the planes, like if people are flying their planes back. If somebody wants to be a stickler, first place should fly their planes back to wherever they're flying them, and then second place, or second turn, third turn, etc. Same thing with deploying units. You're supposed to be able to deploy them simultaneously, but if anybody complains, again, you can do it in turn order. I think that's pretty much it for this phase. Yeah, that's pretty much phase 5. Let's move on to phase 6. I'm going to pause here so I can get the morale board over here and get a close-up look at it. All right, so over here we have the morale board, and it is updated with all our battle stats. with our losses and whatnot. So, basically, we're going to convert these casualties to stress points, and then we're going to calculate those or track those stress points, and if we hit any thresholds for our nations, then we're going to adjust our place on the homeland status track, which is off board or in the middle of the board. I'll bring that over into focus in a minute once we get there. But here you'll see all the units that were destroyed and eliminated in the battles, as well as the 4 convoys for the United States that the Germans sunk. And you'll see that they all sunk convoys act as submarines, basically. So it doesn't matter which color convoy ships that you're sinking, they are always just the submarines, or the submarine row, essentially. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to tally your units, you're going to count your units, and you're going to multiply that by the number to the left or to the right, however you want to look at it. And then that is how many casualty points you're going to have. So for instance, the British Commonwealth are going to have 4 casualty points because they have 1 fighter, right? So the casualty to stress conversion, the first box here is 0 to 18. They have 4, so they'd fall in this box. That gives them 0 stress points, so they don't take any stress points. Then you take that unit, that fighter, and it just goes back into the box, back into the supply. Now we go to the Russians. We have 3 infantry and 1 artillery. So that's 4 units in this row, and then 4 times 2 is 8. So then we'll go up here, 0 to 18. That's still there. They take no stress. And then these units go away, get put back into the box. Then we go to America. America has 1 infantry here for 2 points, 2 casualty points. 1 plane here for 4, that's 6 total. And then they have 4 destroyed convoys at 6 apiece. So we have 24, 28, 30. So that is 0 to 18. They're above this, and they're 20 to 34. So they're in here, so they take 1 stress. So we would move America up 1 on the stress track. And then these units all go back into their respective locations. And then finally we have the Germans. And for Germany, we have 1 bomber, which is 6 points, 1 plane, which is 4, so that's 10. And then we have 3 units here at 2 apiece, 6, so that's 16. 0 to 18, 0 stress, so they stay in the 0 track, or at 0 stress. And then these units come off and go back into their respective boards. So now we have resolved stress, or the casualty to stress. At this point, we would, if anybody had any medals they wanted to spend, they could spend a medal to go down 1 on the stress track. So this track right here. So if America had a medal, they could spend it and reduce their stress back down to 0. Your stress is going to persist from round to round. So you are going to have to manage that with medals. You could also use civilian goods, which we're going to talk about in the next phase, at a 1-for-1. Same thing with the medals. 1 medal for 1 stress point, 1 civilian good for 1 stress point. They do make a point to say that you cannot trade medals and you cannot trade civilian goods with your allies. So whatever you have is what you have, and you can't give it to anybody else. Then the next step is you're going to evaluate your stress level. So right now, America is the only one who's gained any stress. They gain 1 stress, but their stress threshold, their limit, is 4. Once they get to 4, they are going to increase 1 on the homeland status track. And I'll bring that over in a second. But let's just say that America got 6 stress this round, right? They took heavy losses, or maybe they invaded some neutral countries. or they lost countries as well. That could give them stress. You remember, it's when you lose a territory, sorry, not a country, when you lose a territory, you gain stress equal to that territory's strategic value. When you when you invade a neutral territory, you gain a stress. So it's not just from the casualties. There are other things that can give you the stress, and the other thing being the whoever breaks the Russian-Japanese pact takes that big 6 stress loss, which is pretty huge. But it's probably going to happen in almost every game, World War game, anyways, global war, whatever it's called. So let's say they had 6 points here. They didn't have enough medals. Maybe they had 7. They used a medal and they got it down to 6. So 4 is their break point. So they would go up 1 on the Homeland status track, and then the remainder 2 would just fall they minus that 4 from their 6 and fall back to 2, and that's how many they're going to start the next round with. So you are going to be able to accumulate, and you can accumulate more than 10. You just keep counting. You put another flag token here, and then start up the track again. And if you get to 10 again, you put a second one there and start up the track again. And then you're going to be hurting, unless you're spending a lot of medals. But medals you don't get very many of them, unless you're you're taking control of a ton of territories. So then that's where we would adjust this stress versus the Homeland status track and adjust those tokens. Then at that point, everybody has the option. Now, this should all be done in turn order. So when you're the converting the casualties to stress doesn't have to be done in turn order, because that's just math. But when you are determining whether you want to spend metals or civilian goods to reduce stress, that has to be done in turn order. And you can't take any, like if the first player goes and says, you know what, I'm not gonna waste any of my metals right now, because everybody's sort of equal stress. Let's say we're all at 3, and he's like, well, everybody else is there, and I'm going to take a bet that nobody else is going to use tokens to reduce their stress. So I think I'm in good shape. I'm just going to not use any metals to reduce my stress. Player 2 goes and says, you know what, I'm going to use 2 metals to reduce my stress down to 1. Player 1 then can't say, oh, you know what, I've changed my mind. Once player 1 has confirmed their decision, they are or not going to use metals. That's it. Their decision is final. They can't take it back. So it is very important that be done in turn order. The same thing with when you're resolving the stress and you're moving up on the track and deciding whether you want to. At this point, once we've adjusted everybody up on the Homeland status track to where their new sections are, and you can go up more than one spot per turn, depending on how much stress you get. So, for instance, if America gets 8 stress in one turn, that's 2 times 4. They're going to go up 2 spots on the Homeland track. Homeland status track. After that, the Homeland status track is updated for everybody in turn order. You will be able to spend your metals and or civilian goods in any combination. So you can spend 2 metals and 2 civilian goods, or 3 metals and 1 civilian good, or however you want to do it. Equal to your stress limit. So America would have to spend 4, China would have to spend 5, any combination equal to 5, and Germany and Japan would have to spend any combination equal to 6. And then you would be able to move back 1 space on the Homeland status track, which I'm going to grab right now and bring down. If I can get it out of here. Here we go. I'll set that right like that. All right, so you'll see everybody starts here at 0 stress on the start space on the Homeland status track. This is where you would move once you hit your breakpoint limits. You're going to move around this track. After we adjust all these, so for instance, let's say America did, let's say they hit 2. Let's say they had 8 stress, and their breakpoint is 4, so they would have moved twice on the the Homeland Status Track, right? At this point, once we've updated this and they're here, they have a chance. They could spend 4, a combination of 4 from the metals and or the civilian goods to move back 1 spot on this track. They can only do that once per turn, and they can only move back 1 space. So they would have to move back. They could spend that 4, move back here, and then on the next turn, if they don't increase again, they could spend another 4 to move back to the start. You can't move back past the start. This is far back as you can go. Same thing with the dark gray up here, the mass desertions. This is as far as you can go on the Homeland Status Track. So now we apply the penalties. So once everybody's had a chance to determine if they wanted to go back 1 on the track, we will apply the penalties of where everybody's at. And these are cumulative. So for instance, if the United States is in dysfunctional infrastructure, this means no rail usage and no port advantage. So any location that they own, or any territory that they are in control of, they cannot use the rail and they cannot use the port advantage. The port advantage, remember, is the repairing your Navy ships for free after a battle. The blue stress here says lose any 3 resources. This is the labor and civil unrest. And you basically have to pay the 3 resources if you're able to as a penalty. So you pay any 3 resources from your pegboard, your resource board, if you can. Up to that 3. So if you only have 1 resource left, you have to pay that 1 resource. You don't get to have 1 resource left and say, well, I can't pay 3, so I'm just going to keep this 1. It doesn't work that way. And like I said, it was cumulative, so they would have this, and then they would also have to pay this. When you get to supply lines disrupted, you lose 3 movement orders. So this means that when you're in your strategic planning phase, when you're writing on your OMP charts, for instance, if the United States gets here, they will only have 6 orders they can place instead of 9. I believe Italy and China only have 6. So if they get here, then they only have 3 orders they can assign. As like I said, it's cumulative, so you would do this one, and this one if you were here. Economic collapse, no resource income. This means that you are not going to be able to add to your resource chart. You're not going to be able to gather resources at the start of your turn. Your economy is collapsed, and you're not producing anything, so you don't get any more resources. Finally, if you get into the gray zone, units desert 1 per stress. So this says that the nation's player must now transfer to the casualty list a number of its units from the world map equal to its current stress points. Those points are not reduced for these desertions. So basically, however many stress points you are up on the track, like for instance, if the U.S. was here and they were all the way in her mass desertions, they would have to pick 2 of their units out on the board, and they would come to the casualty board. So you're going to lose wherever your stress level is. That's how many you're going to lose during this phase 6 of morale. And that's pretty much it for phase 6. So that finishes off phase 6. You're taking your casualties, you're converting those into stress points, you're using those, you're determining if you're going to reduce those stress points any. Then you're going to adjust yourself on the Homeland Status Track. Then you're going to determine if you want to spend a combination of metals and or civilian goods to reduce 1 spot on the civilian track. If able, then you're going to apply the penalties that each player has on this track, and that finishes phase 6. And then we have 1 more phase left to do, and that is production. And I'm going to pause here and get set up for that, and then I'll come right back. All right, now for phase 7, we're going to go back to our OMP board. This is where we are, our OMP chart. This is where we are going to This is production. Phase 7 is the production phase. This is where we are going to put out units on the board to produce. Hopefully they survive until the end of the next round when we can deploy them, which is what we would have done in the previous phase. So the first thing, what we're going to do is we're going to, again, this is the dry erase version of the OMP chart, just because it's easier for me to write on. But we're going to focus on this section down here, and then we're going to focus on this whole half of the chart. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to write your current resource totals in these boxes. Okay? So I'm just going to make up some at random. I'm going to say I've got 5 oil. I'm going to say that I have 10 iron, and I'm going to say I have 16 OSR, right? So that's step 1 of this phase. Everybody just writes down what their current resources are. This is what you have to work with. The next step is to go to this section and make your purchases. If you are playing the global war game, the scenario where the whole world is in battle, it's not just the Eastern Front or the war in Europe or the Pacific, but if you're playing with the whole map and all countries involved, during this step where you're purchasing units, you can also perform one trade with a neutral territory. That neutral territory has to have a circular trade icon, which I'm going to show you here real quick. You'll see that here. Sweden has the iron trade icon here, so they can be traded with, and they're going to trade iron. So this is what they will give you, and you have to give them either OSR or oil. So there is an exchange rate, and the exchange rate is the same for every neutral territory. It is 5 OSR, 3 iron, and 2 oil. So you can trade 5 OSR for 3 iron, or you can trade 2 oil for 3 iron, or you can trade 2 oil for 5 OSR, etc. It's the same for every country. But every country is only offering one good, and they're not going to take that good in trade. So, for instance, with Sweden offering iron, you can't trade iron to Sweden. There are some pro-allied neutral countries. They are shaded light green. Most of them are near the United States. There's Greenland and Mexico, Central America, Brazil, etc. Those will only trade with the allies, and a captured neutral country will only trade with whoever has control of it. And they do make a point to indicate that China cannot trade at all. So there is that. Now, you will also have to, there are some limits as to who you can trade with and can't based on what's going on in their neighboring territories. So you can only trade if you or an ally controls a territory that doesn't have a battle going on that is adjacent to the trading neutral territory. So in order to trade with Sweden, let me see if there's a better example here for me to look at. There isn't. I would have to readjust the camera. Well, in order to trade with Sweden, basically, Norway here would have to be free of German troops, or Finland here would have to be free of German troops, and the Allies would have to have a unit in here in Finland. Then we could trade with Sweden. You can trade via sea access. So you can trade if there's no enemy command units. in that that port. So, for example, well, Sweden does have a port, and it's right here. So, if these enemy units were not here, then we could potentially trade. Or the Allies could potentially trade here. However, the Axis must have a friendly naval unit in that port territory to be able to trade with them. So it's kind of the Axis are using an intimidation type thing where, hey, you're going to trade with us. The Allies don't have to have that requirement. It just has to be free. The port city has to be free of enemy units. As I said, there can only be one trade with a neutral territory per round. So, getting back over here to our OMP chart, you're only going to be able to do one of these. Well, you're gonna trade. You're gonna minus something, but you're gonna add something else. So two of these will be filled out, I guess. But you only do one trade with a neutral territory per turn, and but that territory can be traded with by multiple nations. So it's not like if you use it, then nobody else can use that same trade partner. It's not a thing, and you would track that here. This is where you would track the trade. If you use 2 oil and gain 3 iron, then you would just mark that here. And then you're going to go over here and you're going to fill this chart out based on what you want to produce. So in this column, you're going to write down how many of each item you're going to produce, and each dot here indicates the cost for each resource. So, for instance, one piece of armor costs 1 oil, 2 iron, and 1 OSR. So if you put 2 here, you would, in this column where you indicate how many resources you're going to use, it'd be 2 resources, 4 iron, or 2 oil, 4 iron, and 2 OSR to build 2 armor. So you'd have 2, 2, 4, and 2. Battleships, you're going to build 1, then you're going to build 3, 4, and 3. The only other kind of additional thing up here is the civilian goods. This is the CG, and they cost 5 of any resource. You can mix them. So, like if you're going to build 2 civilian goods, you would put a 2 here, and then let's say we're going to pay 5 oil, 3 iron, and 2 OSR. Or most likely 5 OSR, 3 iron, and 2 oil to meet the 10 requirement to build 2 of them. And then you would place those onto your metal section on the morale board so you have them to use. Once you have your chart filled out, you're going to hand that chart over to one of your opponents so they can check your work and your math and make sure everything works out. If you made a mistake, well, that's too bad for you and good for your opponents because they're going to be the ones to catch it. And let's say you you might not be able to build the number of units that you think you can build, and that has to be adjusted. Then you are going to place your units. So you're going to get all the units that you want. So let's say, let's just say I'm going to build 2 armor. So I'd be 2, I'd be 4, that'd be 2, and then I want to build 1 bomber. That'll be 2, 2, and 1. And then I want to build let's say I want to build a cruiser, right? 1 cruiser. So I'll do 2, 3, 2. Now I'm going to total all these up. I didn't do any trades. So over here I didn't do any trades. Post trade, you would make you could bring your totals up here. So no trade. So I got 5, 10, 16. So then you just do the math. So total purchased, I'm going to purchase 5 OSR. I'm going to use 9 iron, and I'm going to use 6 oil. You can see that I messed up here because I only have 5 oil. So I would have handed this over to my opponent, and he would have said, hey, you can't do that. So then basically I would lose something here. So we'll say that that's going to cause me to lose. I'm not going to be able to. I get to decide. You would get to decide what gets lost. But you don't get to, well, I'll do a redo. Instead of buying that, I'll just buy this. It's too late at this point. You screwed up. You don't have the resources. The order's already been put in. You can't change it. So then this all gets adjusted again. So this would actually be 3. This would be 6. And this would be 4. Now, 5 minus 4 is 1. Uses your remaining resources. 10 minus 6 is 4. And 16 minus 3 is 13. So then this is where I would adjust my resource on my pegboard to indicate what I actually have. Then I'm going to get what I built. So I built 2 tanks, 2 armor, and 1 bomber. So I will go and I'll get 1 bomber, and then I'll get 2 tanks. And I'm gonna build them in 1 stack. You're gonna create 1 stack with them, and you're gonna put this industry token on top of them. And you're gonna put these out in turn order. You're gonna put these out in one of your industries, territories that has an industry that would be able to build this many units. So this is where you also have to take into account anything that's bombed, that may not be able to have the normal amount of units built in it that its strategic value indicates. But I'm going to set this out here. Kind of difficult to stack those. So let me switch this over here. You'll see that I put this stack of units out here in Greater Germany. Strategic value is 8, so I can build 8 things, produce 8 things at once, and I put them right here. There's only 3, so I'm good. You do this in turn order, so whoever goes first is gonna tip their hand as to what they're doing, and people can react to that. Like I said, you stack all the units in that same fashion. So if there were naval units, they would be stacked under here as well. They do not get stacked out in the ocean. They only get put in the ocean when they deploy. They are built on land, and then they are deployed into the sea, an adjacent sea with a port. Your opponents will check your strategic values to, like I said, just to make sure that you can actually produce that many units there. Again, if you screwed up, well, you get to choose which units you lose, but that's it. Hey, but I've already paid for them. Well, that's too bad. You should have been paying attention. You don't get to reclaim resources. You just lost it. So these are the units. When you see units out here, these are the units that can be affected by strategic bombing runs, which is what I kind of half screwed up in the previous video by forgetting to do that in the example that I wanted to show it until later. So this is where, instead of just collecting resources, I could have bombed and destroyed these units. Instead of the resources or putting the bombing tokens out, I could have destroyed units that were actually being produced, which is huge. And that's pretty much it. That goes in turn order, and everybody puts it out. Puts out their units they purchased, and then this completes phase 7, which will finish a complete round of the game, and then we start back over at phase 1, where we're gonna gather our resources and so forth and so on, and start over. Um, they do make a point to indicate that China, when you do place these new units, China doesn't have an industry to build with, or they never have these industry tokens. They basically just deploy straight out onto the map. There's a special icon on the the Chinese territories to indicate that they are infantry. They can only produce infantry at the start of the game, and they just get put right out on the board. They don't have to wait around to be deployed or anything like that. And they will only ever eventually get to produce artillery if they recapture their capital. So that is the last three phases of War Room Second Edition. You're going to be checking for victory requirements. Basically, the Axis have to control um, two of the three capitals. So they have to control either Great Britain and Moscow, or the Eastern United States. Um, Two of those three they have to control. The Axis players do, and the Allies basically have to control Greater Germany and Japan. Uh, Italy's not in. Italy's not well. Italy's adjacent to Greater Germany, so that would be pointless. Um, but that's pretty much it. That is the whole. That's the last three phases of War Room Second Edition. There are some other rules that I may do another video on in terms of little things that might trip you up, or things that you have to remember. But for the most part, this should give you enough to go on to get started. Um, you're basically going to keep playing through those same 7 phases until somebody has gotten control or has met the victory conditions. I believe, from what I have read, that the global war game at least goes on for roughly 6 to 8 turns before one side has managed to capture what they need to capture to win the game. So it's not. It is a long game, but it's not long in number of turns. It's just there's so many phases. Probably resolving the battles is going to be the longest part. That's also going to be the funnest part, I think, in my opinion. Plus the hidden movement from the OMP charts, uh, and messing up your opponent's moves and stuff, coordinating with other players, miscommunicating with your allies, all the fun stuff that just makes for a blast in these games. So that is War Room Second Edition, and I need to tear this down and put it up. This seems like it's going to be maybe a pain to tear down. We'll see. I'm hesitant. I'm hesitant to see how all of these unit markers are going to go back. They were all stacked, nice and neat and perfect in the component box. And I'm hoping that they don't have to be stacked nice and neat and put back in there. They can just be thrown in, maybe shuffled around a little bit. We're going to find out. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. This was the last 3 phases of War Room Second Edition.